All right, Proverbs chapter 7. Let's call this one My Son, Her Story. In this proverb, where the writer seems to try to add to his list of persuasions a story that describes the forbidden woman in possibly three movements, I guess we can call it. It's a term I borrowed from somebody else. Three movements or three sections of the story that can possibly help us understand this new perspective on the father's caution to his son, as he is going to say in the first 5 verses. Once again, son, be careful of the wayward woman, as in the first movement in verses 6 through 9. He's going to start with the story of a young man that he is going to describe as lacking sense as he looked out amongst the group of young people that he had the chance to observe from his home or from his window. He's going to go on in verses 10 through 23 to move on to talk about the forbidden woman. And a few of the characteristics it might be helpful to understand about her seems to be her confidence in verse 11, her forceful manner in verse 13, and her boldness in verse 14, speaking openly about the way in which she has kept vows in the middle of a scheme where she's ultimately trying to break another set of vows. But that boldness is going to lead into the thing that cinches the trap, as he's going to describe her persuasive speech as the thing that cinches together all of the different elements of this trap she set for the young man to overcome whatever resistance he might have been putting up, ultimately describing him in verses 24 through 27 as one of many in what might be described as a section that gives us the moral of the story. And in saying that he is just one of many, it may be in what we would call today giving us her body count. Understanding that he is not so much emphasizing her body count before marriage, he's emphasizing her body count after she took her vows. And once again, even though this one isn't so much setting up a warning against not only the wayward woman and the wicked man, it still has a broader application if you understand the degree to which showing an indication or a level of comfort with breaking her vows may simply be an indication of her larger comfort level and playing around with the truth. The reason I say it has a larger implication beyond simply the wayward woman is not simply an attempt to pander or soften the word's effect on potentially adulterous situations, but it's because the word itself literally uses adultery as a metaphor for idolatry, something that we have talked about before, which is a crime against truth and ultimately against God that is not limited by gender. The body count against her vows giving us an indication of how comfortable she might have become in breaking her word, which reminded me of the earlier portion of the proverb, that portion running from roughly verses 10 through 23, when we noticed her confidence in verse 11, her forcefulness in verse 13, and her boldness in verse 14, giving us an additional indication of not only how comfortable she's become in breaking her vows, but how skilled she has become at breaking her vows, understanding that things that might ordinarily bother our conscience don't seem to be an issue for her anymore. Reminding me again of the broader application to something we talk about from time to time, that being what counselors would call character disturbance, understanding that there are people whose confidence can be deceptive because their conscience no longer functions in the way that it should. People who have quite possibly gotten used to doing wrong for so long that it no longer bothers them in the way that it might bother you. People so confident that you can begin to feel like there is something wrong with you when your conscience is actually working just fine. And the messages that it's sending you to stop are really the messages that you should be listening to. Which is why we sometimes say, my prayer for me is my prayer for you. God, please deliver us from the times in which someone else's confidence has the potential to lead us astray. And may you add to that the wisdom to bow out of those situations gracefully.